What happens when America's most beloved actor walks into what he believes is a friendly interview, only to discover the host has prepared a political ambush designed to destroy his carefully maintained reputation? Tonight, we're diving into the shocking confrontation that left viewers speechless, the moment when Tom Hanks realized he wasn't dealing with a professional entertainer, but someone with a clear agenda to humiliate him on national television. This story will completely change how you view late-night talk shows forever. Make sure you hit subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because what you're about to hear is absolutely incredible. The Jimmy Kimmel live studio was filled with its typical pre-show excitement as audience members settled into their seats, many of them longtime fans who had specifically come to see Tom Hanks, one of Hollywood's most respected and universally loved actors. The energy was warm and welcoming, exactly the kind of atmosphere that had made Kimmel's show a staple of late-night television for so many years. Everyone expected this to be a delightful interview filled with charming anecdotes and good-natured humor. Behind the scenes, Tom Hanks was going through his usual preparation routine, chatting easily with makeup artists and crew members who had worked with him on previous appearances. His publicist had briefed him on the standard promotional talking points for his latest film, a heartwarming drama that showcased his incredible range as an actor. Everything seemed perfectly normal, with Hanks displaying the same genuine warmth and professionalism that had made him a favorite guest on talk shows for decades. Jimmy Kimmel, however, had spent his preparation time very differently. Sources later revealed that the host had been researching controversial political topics and social issues, preparing a series of loaded questions designed not to promote Hanks's film, but to trap him into making statements that could be taken out of context and used against him. Kimmel had apparently decided that this interview would be his opportunity to score political points rather than entertain his audience. The show opened with Kimmel's usual monologue, his jokes landing well with the studio audience who had no idea what was about to unfold. When he introduced Tom Hanks, the crowd erupted in genuine enthusiasm and affection. Hanks walked onto the stage with his characteristic humility and grace, waving to the cheering fans with a smile that seemed to light up the entire studio. He looked every inch the consummate professional, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that conveyed both elegance and approachability. The first few minutes proceeded exactly as everyone expected. Kimmel asked about Hanks's latest film, praising his performance and asking about his preparation for the challenging role. Hanks responded with his trademark storytelling ability, sharing behind-the-scenes anecdotes that had the audience laughing and completely engaged. He talked about working with the talented cast, the dedicated crew, and the important themes the film explored, displaying the same passion and authenticity that had made him one of America's most trusted entertainers. But those paying close attention might have noticed subtle warning signs that something wasn't quite right. Kimmel's questions seemed to carry an undercurrent of skepticism that went beyond typical late-night show banter. When Hanks mentioned the film's themes of unity and understanding, Kimmel's response carried a hint of sarcasm that seemed oddly out of place given the context of what should have been a supportive interview. As the conversation continued, Kimmel began steering the discussion toward more politically charged territory. He brought up current events and social issues, but instead of asking for Hanks' thoughtful perspective as an experienced observer of American culture, he seemed to be setting traps, asking questions that were designed to force the actor into taking controversial positions that could be used against him later. The audience began to sense that something was shifting in the dynamic between host and guest. The comfortable laughter that had filled the studio during the opening minutes became more hesitant and uncertain. People started exchanging glances, unsure whether what they were witnessing was part of some elaborate setup, or if genuine tension was beginning to build between two men who should have been having a friendly conversation. Hanks, drawing on decades of experience handling interviews and public appearances, maintained his composure and tried to redirect the conversation back to more appropriate topics. When Kimmel made pointed comments about celebrities who speak out on political issues, Hanks responded with measured thoughtfulness, explaining that he believed artists had a responsibility to use their platforms responsibly while respecting different viewpoints and perspectives. But Kimmel wasn't satisfied with diplomatic answers. In fact, he seemed frustrated by Hanks's refusal to take the bait and make inflammatory statements that could be turned into viral clips. The host leaned forward in his chair, adopting a more aggressive posture as he prepared to escalate his attack on someone who had come onto his show in good faith, expecting nothing more than a pleasant promotional interview. "You know, Tom," Kimmel said, his tone shifting noticeably as he prepared to reveal his true intentions for the evening. "A lot of people have been saying that Hollywood celebrities like yourself live in a bubble, completely out of touch with what real Americans are going through. How do you respond to critics who say you have no right to speak about issues that affect ordinary working people?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, marking the moment when this seemingly routine celebrity interview began its transformation into something much more confrontational and dangerous. The studio audience fell noticeably quieter, sensing that they were about to witness something they had never signed up for when they came to see what they thought would be a light-hearted talk show. Hanks's expression remained pleasant, but there was a new alertness in his eyes, the look of someone who had just realized that he was no longer among friends, but had walked into what amounted to a carefully planned ambush designed to damage his reputation and career. Hanks paused for a moment, clearly processing the hostile nature of Kimmel's question before responding with the kind of measured thoughtfulness that had earned him respect throughout his career. "Well, Jimmy, I think that's a pretty unfair characterization. I've been fortunate in my career, absolutely, but I've never forgotten where I came from or lost touch with the values that my parents instilled in me. I think most people in this industry work very hard and try to use whatever influence they have responsibly." Kimmel pounced on that response like a predator who had just spotted weakness. "But that's exactly what I'm talking about, Tom. You say you haven't forgotten where you came from, but when was the last time you actually lived like an ordinary American? When was the last time you worried about paying rent or putting food on the table? How can you possibly understand what regular people are going through when you live in a completely different world?" The accusations were designed to paint Hanks as an out-of-touch elitist, someone who had lost connection with ordinary Americans despite his carefully cultivated everyman persona. The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they watched one of their most beloved entertainers being attacked without provocation by someone who was supposed to be conducting a friendly interview. Hanks felt his composure being tested in a way that it hadn't been in years. This wasn't legitimate journalism or even fair criticism. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate him and undermine his credibility with the American public. "Jimmy, I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental here. Success doesn't automatically disconnect you from your values or your empathy for other people. I've been blessed with opportunities, but I've also worked incredibly hard for everything I've achieved, and I've never taken any of it for granted." But Kimmel wasn't interested in reasonable dialogue or respectful disagreement. He had clearly decided that this interview would be his opportunity to score political points and create viral content at Hanks' expense, regardless of the damage. It might do to someone who had spent decades building a reputation based on integrity and professionalism. "That's a nice speech, Tom, but it doesn't really answer the question," Kimmel pressed, his voice taking on a more aggressive edge. "The fact is, you live in a mansion, you fly on private jets, you make millions of dollars per movie, and then you have the audacity to lecture ordinary Americans about their politics and their values. Don't you think that's just a little bit hypocritical?" The word hypocritical hit Hanks like a slap in the face. Here was a talk show host, someone who had built his own career on entertainment rather than artistic achievement, calling him a hypocrite for expressing thoughtful opinions about the country he loved. The accusation was not only unfair, but deliberately inflammatory, designed to provoke exactly the kind of reaction that would make for compelling television. Hank straightened in his chair, his famous calm demeanor beginning to show cracks under the relentless assault. "I'm not lecturing anyone, Jimmy. I'm simply someone who cares deeply about this country and wants to see it succeed. If having opinions and expressing them thoughtfully makes me a hypocrite, then I guess I'm guilty as charged. But I'd rather be called a hypocrite than someone who stays silent when I think I have something valuable to contribute." Kimmel sensed that he was finally getting the reaction he had been hoping for, and decided to escalate his attack even further. "Something valuable to contribute? Tom, you're an actor. You pretend to be other people for a living. What makes you think your opinions are any more valuable than those of a plumber, or a teacher, or a nurse? Why should anyone care what you think about politics or social issues?" The dismissive tone and the deliberate minimization of his career and intelligence was more than Hanks could tolerate in silence. This wasn't just about political disagreement anymore. This was about basic respect and human dignity. Kimmel was treating him like a fool, like someone whose thoughts and feelings were worthless simply because he worked in the entertainment industry. "You know what, Jimmy?" Hanks said, his voice rising slightly for the first time in the interview. "I think you're absolutely right. I am just an actor. But I'm also an American citizen who has lived through decades of change in this country, who has traveled all over the world and met people from every walk of life, who has had the privilege of portraying characters that have taught me about courage, sacrifice, and the best of human nature. Maybe that doesn't make me an expert on everything, but it certainly gives me a perspective that I think is worth sharing." The studio had fallen completely silent now, the audience sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the usually comfortable world of late-night television. This wasn't playful banter or even edgy comedy. This was a genuine intellectual and emotional battle between two men who clearly had very different ideas about respect, professionalism, and the role of public figures in American society. Kimmel's response revealed just how committed he was to his strategy of provocation and humiliation. "A perspective worth sharing? Tom, you've been living in Hollywood for so long that you've completely lost touch with reality. You think because you've played some inspiring characters that somehow makes you inspirational in real life? You think because you've made some movies about American heroes that makes you qualified to tell the rest of us how to think and feel about our own country." That accusation struck at the very heart of who Hanks was, as both an artist and a person. The suggestion that his decades of thoughtful work portraying American characters and exploring American themes was somehow meaningless or fraudulent was more than just a professional insult. It was a personal attack on his integrity and his genuine love for his country and its people. Hanks stood up slowly from his chair, his famous composure finally reaching its breaking point after enduring minutes of deliberate provocation and personal attacks. The movement was measured and controlled, but there was an unmistakable dignity and authority in his posture that commanded the attention of everyone in the studio. This was no longer the friendly, accommodating guest who had walked onto the stage earlier. This was someone who had been pushed beyond his limits by a host who had abandoned all pretense of professionalism. "You know what, Jimmy?" Hanks said, his voice carrying a weight and intensity that few people had ever heard from America's most beloved actor. "I came here tonight to talk about a film that I'm proud of, to share some stories with people who might enjoy them, and to have what I thought would be a pleasant conversation with a colleague in the entertainment industry. Instead, I find myself being lectured about my own country by someone who seems to think that attacking his guests makes for good television." The studio was now completely silent, the audience members staring in stunned disbelief as they witnessed one of the most respected figures in American entertainment finally standing up to a host who had clearly crossed every line of professional decency. The cameras continued rolling, capturing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. Kimmel, perhaps finally beginning to realize that his strategy had backfired spectacularly, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Tom, come on, this is just what we do here. This is television. You know I'm just trying to create an interesting conversation. don't take it so personally." But his words sounded hollow and desperate, a pathetic attempt to disguise his malicious intent as mere entertainment. "Interesting conversation?" Hanks repeated, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. "Jimmy, there's a difference between interesting conversation and deliberate humiliation. There's a difference between challenging your guests and attacking their character and intelligence. What you've done here tonight isn't entertainment. It's just cruelty disguised as comedy." The host made one more desperate attempt to justify his behavior, revealing just how deeply committed he was to his confrontational approach. "Look, Tom, I'm just asking the questions that people are thinking. I'm holding you accountable for the things you say and the positions you take. If you can't handle a little pushback, maybe you shouldn't be expressing political opinions in public?" "Pushback?" Hanks laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Jimmy, what you've done here tonight isn't pushback. It's a coordinated attack designed to embarrass me and damage my reputation. You've questioned my intelligence, my integrity, my right to have opinions about my own country, and my qualifications to speak about issues I care deeply about. And you've done all of this under the guise of entertainment, using your platform to spread negativity and division, rather than bringing people together." The audience was now completely captivated by the unfolding drama, many of them recording what they knew would become a defining moment not just in Hanks's career, but in the history of late-night television. The comfortable, predictable world of celebrity interviews had been shattered by a host who had chosen provocation over professionalism, and a guest who had finally decided he wouldn't tolerate being treated with disrespect. Hanks began moving toward the front of the stage, his decision clearly made despite the unprecedented nature of what he was about to do. "I've spent my entire career trying to entertain people, to tell stories that inspire and uplift, to portray characters who represent the best of human nature. I've tried to use whatever influence I have to encourage understanding, compassion, and unity. What you've done here tonight is the exact opposite of everything I believe in." Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation, but his words only served to underscore how completely he had misunderstood the magnitude of his mistake. "Tom, please, don't do this. We can work this out. Maybe I got a little carried away, but that's just my style. You know how television works. Sometimes you have to push buttons to create compelling content. Your style?" Hanks paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to face Kimmel with an expression that mixed profound disappointment with unwavering dignity. "Your style is to invite respected guests onto your show and then try to destroy their reputations for the sake of ratings? Your style is to use your platform to spread cynicism and negativity instead of bringing joy and laughter to people's lives? Well, Jimmy, I want no part of your style." Without another word, Hanks stepped down from the stage and began walking up the aisle toward the exit, his head held high despite the chaos he was leaving behind. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the stunned silence of the studio as he made his way toward the doors, never once looking back at the host who had so thoroughly destroyed what should have been a pleasant evening of entertainment. The audience remained frozen in their seats, many of them looking around at each other as if seeking confirmation that what they had just witnessed had actually occurred. This was Tom Hanks, America's dad, the actor who had brought joy and inspiration to millions of people around the world, and he had just been driven from a talk show stage by a host who seemed more interested in creating controversy than entertaining his audience. As Hanks reached the exit doors, he paused for just a moment, not to look back at the disaster he was leaving behind, but to acknowledge the audience members who had been subjected to Kimmel's unprofessional behavior along with him. He gave a slight nod of appreciation to the people who had come expecting to be entertained, and instead had been forced to witness a deliberate attempt at character assassination. Then he was gone, disappearing through the exit doors and leaving behind one of the most uncomfortable and shocking moments in the history of late-night television. The studio remained silent for several long seconds as the reality of what had happened began to sink in for everyone present, from the crew members who had watched in horror to the audience members who had never expected to witness such a display of disrespect toward one of America's most beloved entertainers. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, seemingly unable to process the magnitude of what he had just done or how to proceed with the rest of his show. The confident smirk that had characterized his earlier attacks was nowhere to be seen, replaced by the expression of someone who had just realized that his attempt to create viral content had instead created a public relations disaster of epic proportions. So what do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Tom Hanks right to walk away when faced with such disrespectful treatment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if you've ever seen anything like this on television before. And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable stories from the world of entertainment.